Yate she'e Farina King Yinishye. Hello, my name is Farina King, and I'm one of the three co-authors of the book Returning Home. And this is a picture of the cover here. I'll show you. I started to work on this book several years back with Dr. Mike Taylor first, who reached out to me about a special collection at Utah State University featuring the student works from the Intermountain Indian Boarding School, which was one of the largest federal Indian boarding schools in the United States. And it opened in the 1950s primarily for Dene youth. And Mike knew that I had already been studying and primarily looking at Navajo boarding school experiences since my first book, The Earth Memory Compass, looked at those kinds of educational experiences in the 20th century. I had always been drawn to boarding school experiences because of the stories of my family, especially my father, Shije. And my dad always inspired me by learning about the kind of struggles he faced as a child and the challenges he went through. And those stories were very empowering for me. So, of course, I was excited to get involved in this collaboration with Mike and James. And we've been a great team together in bringing this book, which is really offering a platform to feature direct sources from boarding school students, and mostly Dene, even though the school did become intertribal in its last 10 years or so. And it really adds to the stories and understandings of boarding schools because most studies had primarily focused on the early 20th century. And we're considering how most federal Indian boarding schools had closed, by the 1920s with the Merriam Report that openly criticized the federal Indian boarding school policy. So Intermountain brought a lot of different perspectives, and what was really powerful about it is how active the alumni are, that there's a couple of Intermountain alumni associations that regularly gather, and they are celebrating their experiences, even though they absolutely recognize the hardship and assimilationist agenda of boarding schools like Intermountain. They celebrate and honor what they went through and the accomplishments they had and have, and the friendships and familial relationships that they developed while away from home. So what's interesting about this book is how we focus on the concept of returning home, because there were these different creative works of students, the poetry, the arts, and we wanted to make sure that these archives that remained in northern Utah and Brigham City became accessible to Dene communities and the former students, survivors of boarding schools, their relations, and the Navajo Nation. I think there's a lot of work still to be done with especially understanding the intertribal boarding school years at Intermountain and more boarding school stories and perspectives, because there's not just one experience that can brushstroke through them all. And the image that you see here that we focused on is from one of the Intermountain Indian School students, a Dene student, Robert Chi, and it really embodies the foundations of our book, that we were doing the best we can to have a community-based project, have parts in Dene Bazad, because as we connected with Dene families of Intermountain alumni and community, and a lot of people had different connections to Intermountain because it was such a large boarding school that would have up to 2,000 students at a time. and it was open from the 1950s to 1984. We saw this image and thought about how much family, kinship means to Dene people, and how the students, through their poetry, through their arts, and different ways that they found to sustain their cultures and to connect with their cultures. In that way, they were returning home through their works that we were examining and sharing in this book. And then we were also hoping through this book and the traveling exhibit that we also did to bring these student voices and their sources home. So that was really a wonderful experience for us. And we're so fortunate that we've done this together and with so many people who made this possible, especially the University of Arizona Press, that are creating this book in actual a tangible form. And you'll see, different flyers and announcements about it, some possible, discounts to always look for. So we hope that everyone enjoys this book, but it is especially for us who we had in mind were and are Dene communities and families, the survivors of boarding schools, and those who were able to see beauty always around them, hajo, in all that they're seeking to do and learn in their life experiences. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy the book and continue these important conversations and opportunities to learn, especially right now as we are acknowledging those who did not survive boarding schools and starting to unpack the complicated layers and meanings of boarding schools, especially in settler colonialism and dynamics of power, dispossession, and control. That in all that, I hope we never forget and always remember Indigenous lives and peoples and support Indigenous communities as we heal through such intergenerational trauma and dynamics. Thank you all.